brackets, bubbles, and bid stealers season previews roll on with the Missouri Tigers. Hello, everyone. Jonathan Litzkin, Sam Fetterman here, as always, with us today, joining us for the Mizzou preview. Matt Watkins at Data Mizzou on Twitter. Matt, how's it going today?
It's going well. How are you guys?
We are good. So let's jump right in.
You're going to speak for me? I'm good. I'm doing well.
Go for it, Sam. Nobody's stopping you.
I'm doing well.
All right. Well, we'll jump right into Mizzou. Last year, a surprise to many, not to me. I had them as a tournament team in the preseason, but a lot of new faces this year. In year two, under Dennis Gates. Last year, Mizzou was an extremely fast team, 9th in the country in offensive efficiency, near 200 in defensive efficiency. So a lot of heart attacks, a lot of just kind of nervousness if you're a Mizzou fan. Matt, what did you let's start with last year's team. What did you kind of make of Dennis's system and how he implemented it?
If you liked offensive basketball, it was great. A lot of folks, at least in my experience watching basketball, they tend to skew towards the offensive teams, the ones that score a lot of points. They're like, oh, they're really good. And Mizzou was excellent at that. It was a bit of a surprise, I guess, to me, that you saw a breakout year from Kobe Brown, who I don't remember the exact percentage, but was a sub 30% three-point shooter, and then all of a sudden morphed into the coming of Marcus Denman, which, Mizzou fans know the name, but a very, very good three-point shooter. But they really got up and down the floor. It was a very drastic transformation. It was surprising to me because when you looked at the roster, Kobe Brown returned, Ronnie DeGray returned, and Caleb Brown, Kobe's younger brother, also returned, and Nick Honor transferred from Clemson, and everyone else was some degree of a mid-major transfer, JUCO transfer. So to come out and win 25 games and be one of the best offenses in the country, it was kind of surprising to me. I thought they'd be good offensively. I didn't think they'd be that good.
Yeah, and they not just did win 25 games, make the NCAA tournament, win a tournament game in the first season with Dennis Gates. They did that with their projected leading scorer from before the season playing 14 games. Isaiah Mosley was a non-factor, and that was a guy that Jonathan and I talked up a storm about all offseason last year, coming in from Illinois State.
Missouri State.
Reeves was Illinois State. It's whatever. But 20-point scorer in the Missouri Valley, that's a good conference. Oh, he's just going to come in, score 15, 20 points a game. No. He comes in, never finds his rhythm, ends up getting hurt. But Kobe Brown, as you said, he turned into one of the best players in the country. He was all SEC. He had a case for player of the year. He was like Brandon Miller it was Brandon Miller and Kobe Brown, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Golston and Hodge come in from the mid-major levels. And these are guys that perform immediately at a high level for Missouri. Basically everything that you could have wanted outside of Mosley went right for this team, and everything clicked, and 7 seed. Boom.
Just like that.
Yeah, so I want to move into this year's team because there are some returners along with a lot of new faces. We've seen Dennis kind of utilize the portal pretty heavily in his first 2 years while he gets sort of his guys in, his younger guys, to keep them afloat until those guys are ready. Of this new roster, because Dennis was vocal in the offseason about how he wasn't bringing in anyone that didn't fit the system. How do you see this new look Missouri Tiger team fitting Dennis Gates' system?
Well, that's an interesting question. There's been a kind of an internal debate with my folks over at Rocky Nation, who I do work for, and we have a podcast, Dive Cuts, and we've talked about this a little bit on there, but there's kind of a question about what Dennis Gates' system is. On the one hand, you have the very strong ties to Leonard Hamilton and, of course, Charlton Young, who came from Florida State, and Dennis Gates used to be an assistant there, of their I'm not even sure. Excuse me. I'm not even sure the right word to describe their defense, but they just have long athletes all over the court that just create havoc defensively. Where when we did a little research into Dennis Gates at Cleveland State, and then what we saw last year is he kind of prioritized the skill. And granted, this was a little bit more of availability, but the offense they were running was very skill based. It was a lot of read reaction, cutting, high post action. So I guess there's kind of some question as to what the system is, but I think ideally what they're going for is a blend between the two, kind of what Florida State did defensively. And we're seeing that, excuse me, with the recruiting that they're doing on the prep circuit with the 6'8", 6'9" guys that can jump out of the gym, shoot a little bit, that sort of thing. But also blending that with the heavily skill-oriented offense that he was running last year and as well at Cleveland State. And by skill, I don't mean to say that Florida State didn't possess those skills, but as opposed to just a spread pick and roll team that they're running a lot of modified Princeton sets. But to your point, I think is as we look at this year's roster, the question is kind of going to be who's the playmaker. And what I mean by playmaker, obviously we talked a little bit about Mosley, and he was definitely one of those, but Kobe Brown was kind of the hub of all the activity on offense. Whether they were forced to go 5 out when they were defended by more athletic teams like Alabama, or whether they were able to run more of their Princeton stuff where he was at the elbow, he was very good at dribbling, driving, and passing, and he was doing that all against mismatch because he was being guarded by the opponent's 4 or 5 man, depending on the night. But finding that guy or someone to replicate that position is going to be paramount. Otherwise, they're going to have to kind of reconfigure what they were doing. So, the pieces they brought in, you're not going to bring in a Kobe Brown for that matter, but they did bring in a few freshmen who are very talented. And one of the interesting pickups I thought was Jesus Carolero from Eagle, which, you look at the guy and he had a solid year, I think 2 years ago for Campbell and was banged up this last year, but it doesn't really scream high major fit. But then you look at what he does, and he does a lot of the things that Kobe Brown does. And then you go back to Noah Carter, who's returning this year, does a lot of the same things that Kobe Brown does. So that indicates to me that they're still going to be relying on that type of offense quite a bit.
Yeah. The next thing I kind of wanted to mention was because we kind of getting into the roster in the individual pieces here. This team seems like, once again, like it's going to be hard to tell until opening night, like who the starters are, who's going to get minutes, who's kind of going to be buried, because there was a lot of speculation last year about who was going to play, and then like Golston ended up playing way more than I thought he was going to when they got him, and Diarra ended up playing a lot less than I thought he was going to when they brought him in. What's your best guess on like who the starting 5 is right now? Because like while there is still a lot of uncertainty, we have seen the system for a year, and we can kind of predict what Dennis is going to do more so than we did a year ago.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I've been kind of trying to sort that out in my own head. 2 guys I know you're going to, whether they start or play starter minutes, we'll go with starter minutes just to make it easier. 2 guys that I have no doubt in my mind are going to be Nick Honor and Noah Carter. They're going to be stalwarts. They're the guys that, Nick Honor doesn't really drive the offense so much as a normal point guard does. I think that's going to fall more on Carter's shoulders. But both guys, Nick Honor led the team in minutes last year, even with Kobe Brown and all the other guys. So those 2 for sure. I think the question to me is they're certainly going to play another guard. I would not be surprised to see Caleb Grill in the starting lineup just because he's been there. He's played at Iowa State. He can defend. He can shoot. Those are all things that are prized from an off-ball guard. But I think the question is whether they're going to go with more of a traditional lineup to start with, with the heavy minutes. And they brought in Connor Vanover from Oral Roberts, and he would obviously be well, he would be the obvious guy if you're going to be playing more of a traditional post, and he's not a traditional post, but just going along with it here. And I think that kind of brings us down to that last wing spot. And, whether you're going with more of a traditional look, I think Tamar Bates could work his way into the lineup there, the transfer from Indiana. But one guy I think that a lot of Mizzou fans are going to like is John Tonje from Colorado State. And I think he does a lot of the things that Noah Carter does, but he does them at a different position. And I think if you really wanted to go small, you could theoretically play those two guys together. But I would say some combination of those six would be my top choice.
I mean, I think Tonje was a really good pickup. It was one of the first pickups they had. I mean, this is a guy 60% at the rim last year, good shooter as well, shot like 40% on catch and shoots. This is one of those guys that you look at and say, all right, I trust him to get to the basket. I trust him to hit shots. He can play a little bit of defense. He's a really dynamic player. I think Mizzou fans will absolutely love what he brings to the table. I definitely would be surprised if he's not getting starter minutes for them.
I would agree. Yeah.
And while I think Jonathan and I both are huge Caleb Grill fans, that's been like the whole joke that we've had, that he could help any team in the country, because he can. How many guys are able to shoot as well as he can and play as well defensively on the wing? Iowa State fell apart when he was off the court. Now, I don't think Mizzou will fall apart when he's off the court. I also probably don't think they're as good as Iowa State was last year, but
certainly not defensively.
Yeah, no, but they're probably going to take a step up defensively, I would say, because just the addition of Grill, a guy that can defend. You've seen more guys that have played at a higher level this year. I mean, finally, instead of seeing guys that haven't played at the high major level, there's the guys with experience playing at the high major level like Carter and Honor and Grill and Tamar Bates, and at this point now Caleb Brown and Sean East. These are all guys that have now played at the Division I level, and at the high major level. But last year they didn't really have that, so more experience, more know-how of what to do on that defensive end. And Dennis Gates, we know that guy can really coach. Offensively, this team is not going to be as potent as they were last year.
It'll be hard.
And the Vanover fit is weird to me, because I think he's a high major backup, but I don't think that Mizzou has a 5. And did they really even have like truly reliable post 5s last year? Not really. I mean, Kobe Brown played the 5.
Nothing close. Yeah. Noah Carter was often moonlighting at the 5.
And
he's 6'5", 6'6".
And I mean, like, do you want Aiden Shaw to put on like 20 pounds and try and play the 5? I mean, that's my question here. Will Missouri be able to bang with the big 5s in the SEC? Because Kobe Brown was just a transcendent player that was able to lift a team that had that weakness. I don't think there's a guy like that this year.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the big things this year's team has going versus last year's team is they were really running into some problems at the end of the year with depth. There were nights that they were playing 6.5, 7 guys. 8 guys would hit the floor, but we're talking about 1 or 2 of those guys getting like 5 minutes. And when you're trying to run up and down the court and you so much of your offense is predicated on shooting, it's hard to do that with 6 guys night in and night out. And I think that's something that defensively will help them this year, is they've got 9, 10 guys that I could definitely see being in the rotation, potentially more, depending on how the freshmen pan out. But, I think that's a big question, is whether they have that go-to guy. Mizzou arguably had 3 of them at times last year between Golston, Kobe Brown, and Isaiah Mosley when he was on the court. And that's a luxury that most teams don't have. So how that kind of gets sorted out this year will be a big part of their story.
Yeah, I was at the SEC tournament last year, and like what they were asking Diarra to do in the Alabama game was just like I could not believe that they were in that game for as long as they were with him on the floor. Like it just felt like it was going to collapse eventually, and it did. But they played well in the first half. I do want to ask you, and I was going to save this for the end, but we kind of have been kind of going around it a little bit.
Sure.
Who do you think ends up being this team's best player?
Ooh, best player, as in most productive, most exciting down the road this year.
We'll say most productive because, I mean, most exciting. Like, I feel like that could be one of 8 guys from
right.
This team.
I would probably have to say this is going to be the safe answer, but I'm probably going to go with Noah Carter on that one. I just think that it's the path of least resistance for him. He's not Kobe Brown, but he has a lot of the same attributes, and the offense relies so heavily on that. And, I was actually just looking through the numbers today. We're doing some preview work on him, and I think the first 17 games of the year last year, which granted included non-conference, he averaged 11 points a game. Mm-hmm. For the next 9 or so, he had an absence in there and wasn't quite himself and averaged something like 5 points a game. But down the stretch, the last 8 games, he blossomed back up to 11 points a game. Whether he's going to be a 17, 18-point scorer, I doubt that. But when you combine his scoring ability, his ability to exploit mismatches, and also his ability to share the ball, I think, when you add up all the math, he's going to be right there.
One guy we haven't really touched on yet is Aiden Shaw. I think mm-hmm. I said over the summer that there was like an outside chance that Aiden Shaw is this team's best player just because
you said that
he's athletic, he can shoot. What do you think about him, and what do you think the jump that he's going to take will look like?
Well, the jump, I don't know, aside from his insane vertical. But he has the tools. He has a lot of the tools. He's never going to be a guy who's on the ball. I mean, his ball handling isn't up to snuff, and I doubt that changed over the course of the offseason. But he has the ability to be really elite defensively, and he didn't really show it enough last year for my taste, and I'm sure the coaching staff's taste, but his ability to grab rebounds, that's something that really needs to come around. His shooting wasn't great last year, but I think it can moderate out, and if he can be a 35, 36% three-point shooter, which I think is a 4% jump from this year, he can be a really valuable weapon. As far as what else he can do, obviously, is dynamite in transition, and, when he's able to catch lobs, and he's going to catch it over most people.
70% from inside the arc. I mean, that's just so impressive.
Right. So, I think really defense and rebounding and the ability to tick up the shooting just a little bit. If he's able to do those things, I don't think he's probably going to be the best player in this year's team, but he could be among them if everything goes right. And it's those 3 things that I really look at with him.
Yeah, Mizzou was 48th in the country in assists. 46th in the country in assists per field goal. But it wasn't like they had a true point guard that was like a Marquise Noel passing the ball like crazy. There were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different guys that played more than 20% of the minutes that got that had a 15% assist rate. Mm-hmm. And then DeAndre Golston was at 14.4. This is a team that moves the ball at such a high level. So many guys can move the ball. And this is one of the things that made them so hard to guard. The fact that they were willing to make those passes. Anyone on the court has the vision to make a play. This year, I think we can still see that, even though it's a different roster. There's a ton of experience on this roster compared to what it was last year, and passing I wouldn't say primary playmaking, but secondary playmaking, connective playmaking. That's something that can come with experience.
Yeah, I would agree with that. When you sift through the numbers, there's not going to be a guy who's out front just running pick and rolls all day. Mizzou doesn't have that. Nick Honor can do that to some extent. Sean East is probably their best weapon there. But his outside shooting is going to have to come around for him to really be a weapon as they ball screen playmaker, but everything else is kind of falling into place. A lot of the guys pass well. A lot of the guys protect the ball well. I mean, the thing that struck me last year is for how fast they played, how much they shot, did everything. They were flying up and down the court. They didn't turn the ball over. You know, it was incredible that they protected the ball as well as they do. Their primary point guard, Nick Honor, had just an astronomically low turnover rate. And as long as they do those things, the playmaking aspect can be mitigated a little bit. It's going to be a lower ceiling but higher floor situation. But yes, they definitely pride themselves on moving the ball. You know, whenever they're moving around the perimeter, they've got, you know, if they've got 5 guys out there, it's ball fake, pass, just whipping it around. And then all of a sudden one will duck in, you got a backdoor cut and you got an easy layup. That's how they get these layups. And then, of course, in transition too, I think they'll probably take a little bit of a step back in their transition playmaking just because they don't have an outlet player like Kobe Brown, which of all of his attributes, his ability to collect a rebound and throw a home run pass on the dime, you know, he looked like a legitimate D1 quarterback back there, just throwing it up and down the court. They don't have that, but they still move the ball well on the open floor.
I think Demoy Hodge scored like 4 points a game last year, just like leaking out, and Kobe Brown throwing him a perfect outlet pass with nobody in front of him.
Do you think that who do you think can step up and be a rim protection presence for this team?
Well, I don't think they're going to have a traditional rim protector this year. You know, I think Connor Vanover is probably going to get the bulk of the time inside, if I don't even want to call it a post because he's not a post. But Jonathan Butler, or excuse me, that's his brother.
Jordan Butler?
Jordan Butler.
Yeah, sorry, Jordan Butler. Freshman. He's 6'11", I believe, out of South Carolina. He's going to play some. The amount that he will be playing, I'm not sure. That's kind of remains to be seen. But I think a combination of athletic foremen, if you want to use the traditional 1 through 5, is going to probably be the best play. Whether that's Aiden Shaw, I think Trent Pierce, who we haven't mentioned and we probably should have at this point, is going to be a surprising player for Mizzou this year, and I think he's going to get quite a bit of time. I don't think he's going to be a traditional rim protector, but you know, some combination of those. But I mean, the fact is Mizzou didn't have one last year, and they really don't have one this year.
I mean, Diarra was a little bit of a rim protector.
They're gonna have some guys that are going to pick up some blocks from the weak side, but you know, that's really not who they are this year, at least how I see it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's going to be really interesting when you see Mizzou take on a team like, say, Ole Miss that is totally filled with rim protectors and post presences offensively. Teams like Texas A&M that are super, super physical. And you'll see Mississippi State's going to be physical. There's a lot of really physical teams in the SEC. And not to say Mizzou isn't physical at all, but it's a different type of physicality that Mizzou brings compared to the rest of the league, I would say. And I think that's kind of what made it work so well last year in the SEC. I mean, they were, finished third, fourth in the league? Yeah, finished fourth in the league. Clearly, they were not the 4th best basketball team in the league. I mean, they were 57th in KenPom, but they finished 4th in the league because they just had an element of basketball. They played their basketball better than maybe anybody else in the country possibly could. And it's going to be hard to replicate that. But it's at least worth trying to replicate the idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think defensively, you know, what they lack in rim protection, they're obviously going to try to make up for in turnover rate, which they were very good at generating turnovers, and not just turnovers, but steals. Live ball turnovers, which they were excellent at. And that was a key component of their offense as well. And I do think they have quite a few players this year that are going to project well to do that. And Dennis Gates spoke last year to some length about this, that, obviously it's probably not the ideal situation, but when you've got a team like Mizzou did last year and to some extent this year, you've got to make choices. And his choice was to create turnovers and prevent teams from even getting shots up. So, the rim protection was lessened. Whether that pans out again, I don't know. But I think the big thing for them is they've just got to be a little bit more sound defensively. They created a lot of turnovers last year, but the amount of shots that they allowed at the rim, the amount of shots that they allowed wide open behind the arc, it's just you can't. You're playing with fire whenever you do that. And Mizzou had to be that good offensively to win games. And that's one thing I would like to see them improve at this year, and I think they probably will. Tamar Bates is a very good defender. We've already talked about Caleb Grill is a good defender. So hopefully adding guys like that will, raise the floor a little bit, so to speak.
Yeah, I want to talk about the non-conference schedule
Sure.
a little bit because we did just get last week the SEC schedule came out, but I think
we knew who they were playing in the SEC.
Yeah, it's just we got dates for it. With the non-conference schedule, I do think that it's a lot better than it was last year. The issue with it for me, and I think I just counted it off, I think that there's still going to end up being like 5 sub 300 KenPom teams on it. What are your overall thoughts on the schedule before we talk about some of the matchups?
I would agree with all of that. It's better. There's going to be more high-end games. For those unfamiliar, they've got their two annual games, one at Kansas this year, one against Illinois in St. Louis. Those are going to both be quality games. They've added Seton Hall, who they'll play in Kansas City, as another neutral site game. And then they've also added, let me pull out my cheat sheet here.
Minnesota, Memphis, and Pitt.
Right. You've got some road games in there against some Division I or high major Division I teams. I mean, how good Minnesota is going to be, I don't know. But it's better than playing South Carolina State, who obviously is on the schedule as well at home. But yeah, that's been a kind of a point that I've harped on for a while, that you can play games that you're supposed to win, but they don't have to be games you're supposed to win by 40. Yeah. If you're getting teams that are competitive in their league, I like what you're doing. If you're taking a top team from the MEAC or a top team from the SWAC, it's not great, but it's better than taking the worst team in the league. Same thing with the Missouri Valley. You don't have to take the best team, but if you're playing teams like that, they're in the 150, 200 range.
Yeah,
that's much better.
The MVC are going to be in the 80s and 90s.
Right. And I'm thinking just even if you're taking a mid-level team from there, it's going to be so much better than a high-level team from one of the lower leagues, or much worse, a low-level team from one of the worst leagues. So I do think it's improved. The home slate is a little light for my liking in the non-conference. I think you've got Memphis, that's a great game right off the bat, the first week of the season. Then also Wichita, who's hired Paul Mills this year, who I have no idea what to expect with them, but they do have Ronnie DeGray from Mizzou's team.
And Colby Rogers as well from Siena.
So they could be a surprise team, but ideally you would like a little bit more beef on the home schedule, at least if nothing else for the fans. But the schedule is much improved. Last year was hopefully something we won't see again.
Yeah,
it was bad.
I think it's totally fine to play a couple games against bad 300s level teams. You can play one or two, but it gets to a point where last year the Missouri schedule was pathetic, and there's no way around that. I love that they play Illinois and Kansas every year. I think that more programs need to lean in to that type of stuff, and sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I love that they have Memphis on the schedule. I think that that's a top 20, 25 team. Pitt's a really solid ACC program, and that's a tough place to win. Seton Hall's probably not in line for a great year, but they're always really tough to play against. That's going to be a styles make fights type display. But Minnesota stinks. There's really no way around that.
Yeah, I think maybe your best, maybe your most ideal scenario, that's realistic,
2 losses.
is in non-conference. You come out of it with, you play pretty much up to what you're expected to do against these high major teams that you have scheduled, and then you hope that like 2 sub 300 KenPom teams don't walk into Mizzou Arena again and make every contested 3 for a couple straight games. So
I mean, there is
actually,
a chance Missouri enters SEC play with 2 losses.
Mm-hmm.
It's unlikely. It's unlikely. I say it's probably, but I would be a little bit more surprised if they ended up with 2 losses than if they ended up with 4. But if they ended up with 5, I'd be very surprised.
Yeah.
So 3 or 4 non-conference losses.
I would agree with that. The last thing I kind of want to ask is, what are your like overall expectations when it comes to like where you think Mizzou will finish in the SEC this year, and where they'll be on sort of a national level?
Sure. I've been following the preseason projections. I'm not immune from that. I see that a lot of folks are having them 9th, 10th, 11th, somewhere in there. And I don't think that's wildly wrong, but the thing that I look at, I mean, I've watched college basketball for 25 years now. I'm old. But
we're just young.
Okay. There's 4 attributes that I really look at this team. They've got depth. Their guards are experienced. They shoot the ball well, and they hold on to the ball. And I really struggle to see or think of any high major teams that have a deep bench of experienced guards that shoot the ball well and protect the ball really having a bad season. So we can chuck that out. I think where the difference between being, right in the middle bubble area of the SEC, which now extends down to 8th and 9th, with how much the league has improved. To really get more than that, you're going to have one of the guys who hasn't really stepped up thus far in his college career make a step. Whether that's Aiden Shaw, whether that's Tamar Bates, who I think very well could be that player, or even Trent Pierce, who, again, I alluded to earlier. A lot of people in Columbia love him. They think he's going to be a player. 6'9", 6'10", shoots the ball well. But they're going to need one of those guys to supplement what they have. I think they've got the pieces right now to be in the conversation in March, whether that's, whether they're 9-9 in league, 10-8, whatever. The schedule isn't great in conference play, but they do have some opportunities to grab some marquee wins. It's just going to be a matter of how they do in close games. Last year, they were 6-0 in games decided by 6 points or less. They hit 2 buzzer beaters. They don't hit those, they're a bubble team last year. It's basketball. So how you project those close games, I think that's really where it's going to be determined. And of course, they could turn into a great defensive team. I don't see that necessarily. But the bar was so low last year that any improvement there will help them. So to answer your question, I would not at all be surprised to see them finish 5th, 6th, 7th in the league if things go well, and be a legitimate, maybe get off the 8-9 game when it comes March. Or, if things don't go well, I could see the range being like, oh, this team, is it an NIT? Is it an NCAA team? We don't know. And then down the stretch, they just don't get enough wins. Finish 7-11, 8-10. I think that's less likely, but it's still possible. I think that's kind of the range. The coaching staff really likes this team. I think they have a lot of talent on it. I have questions, but that doesn't mean there's not answers. I had questions last year, and Dennis Gates answered just about every one of them.
Yeah. Because listen, like a couple years ago, Kentucky missed the NCAA tournament, and I know it was a COVID year and whatnot, but the way this league is now, you have so many teams that are recruiting at high levels, so many teams that have made smart and expensive investments in coaches. Like, no team is immune to a down year, and that down year sure, it'll look different for a Kentucky or Tennessee than it does a Mizzou or a Mississippi State, but it's just, I think that with this Mizzou team, you can have expectations. It's just that, like, beware of the climate they're playing in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they're definitely going to be relying on their experience. I think they have something like 7 super seniors on this year's team.
It's a lot,
and they're going to shoot the ball. They're going to fire up threes. I was actually just musing about this a couple weeks ago. That I took all the players' last season's stats, and if you put all that together and their 3-point rate versus their 2-point rate, they would have collectively ranked 4th in America in 3-point rate, this roster together. They are going to shoot 3-pointers, and it's variable. We saw that last year. If they're knocking down shots, they're probably going to knock off some really good teams. The nights that they're not falling, who knows? We saw a few of those last year too. Auburn beat them by 40. Kansas
that game was over by the time out in the first half.
You could tell within the first 10 minutes whether Mizzou is going to be in the game, and if they were in it, they're probably going to win it. So
that game was 26-6 after 10 minutes.
It was bad. It was.
The Kansas game was hard to watch.
Well, I think that game also came right after they had won at Tennessee. They had back-to-back road games and they hit the buzzer beater, and they're flying high. They played great offensively, and then you just come down and it's an absolute clunker. And that's, when you don't have a great defense and you rely so heavily on 3-point shots, that's the nature of the game.
You live by the 3, you die by the 3, and they ended up dying by the Princeton.
Which the irony is not lost.
I said it before the tournament, Jonathan, right there, that Princeton would not lose against a 7 or 10 seed if they somehow beat Arizona.
I think that video is like pinned on your TikTok.
It is 27,000 views.
Oh my God!
Beat by the very offense that you run, just
because they're not running the Princeton the same way. Even if you run Princeton, you can't prepare for Princeton. That's how Princeton is.
Sam, do you have any other questions?
Not really right now, but overall though, the recruiting for 2024 is really strong. I just want your thoughts on where Dennis Gates is going to have this program in a few years.
That's a good question. One of my thoughts is that Mizzou has 3 high school recruits signed for 2023, 2024. Like I said, I'm old. These kids are young. But the 24 class, I believe they've got 3 4-stars signed. And they're pretty heavy in the mix for a couple more top 50 type players. And, they're bringing in visitors left and right. We have simply no idea how many high school players they're going to sign in this class. I initially thought 3, 4. It could be 7 the way they're going right now. But
there's 7 seniors. So
the one thing that I question is if Dennis Gates has a great deal of success this year using a transfer-laden, senior-laden team, and then you revert completely to a underclassmen-led team, is that wise? Is that going to pan out? Is the magic touch, so to speak, is that gone? I don't think so, but it's definitely a wild shift from where they've been the first 2 years. But, if they're able to keep and develop those players, which in 2023, 2024 terms is basically a unicorn, I think they could have a really high ceiling if they start landing some of these guys. But I think typically speaking, they're probably going to land high school players, but they're still going to be active in the portal. There's just no way they're not going to be. And short term, they're going to have a lot of roster turnover this year. So how they fill that will be the question. That's kind of how I'd have to wait and see for that answer. But, I like a lot of the things I'm seeing from him. He's had a very good eye for undervalued talent in the portal. They're recruiting the prep circuit at a high level. Dennis Gates runs good offense. If the defense can come around with their athletes, I mean, I think they're a team that could be a legitimate conference winner level. I won't project March. That's impossible. I like projecting teams before they get to March, but once it gets there, it's who knows. Nate Oates knows that well enough. I do have a contractual provision that I have to mention Nate Oates once in every one of my podcasts. So there it is.
Well, you
and it's usually not flattering, but
just got it in. And we'd like to thank you so much for coming on, and plug your podcast here.
Sure. We, myself, Sam Snelling, and Matt Harris, we do a weekly podcast during the season, Dive Cuts. It can be found over at Rock M Nation. And as you see my name down below there, Data Mizzou, that's my, what is it, X now? X handle? It seems dirty.
I'm still calling it Twitter.
It's Twitter, but whatever they call it now, I don't want to get sued. So, yeah, that's my plug. So I appreciate you guys for having me on. It was fun talking with some new faces. It was good getting some fresh perspectives, and maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Yeah,
and make sure you guys...
or after a big Mizzou game, maybe we get you back on, because we're going to try and do this a lot of nights during the season. But before we get to the season, Sunday, October 8th to Tuesday, October 10th is conference preview weekend. We're going to try and get some big name heavy hitter guests on to preview the Big 12. We're going to get Ethan Bach, the Pac-12, Rocco Miller, and we don't have official word from the other conferences, but we've got some really big names lined up for the Big East and the Big 10 specifically.
We're in the works.
I've probably mentioned them at some point on podcasts before, but I'm excited for that. Then October 16th, the MAC season preview, the second annual preview, will come out, as well as a feature article on former Manhattan College interim coach Rashawn Storrs, now at NJIT. I'm up to 6,500 words on the preview, 3 blurbs down, 8 to go. We're probably going to be over 20,000 words this year. So if you want to spend 3 hours of your life reading on a Monday morning, October 16th is going to be one of your favorite days of the year. And I'm just
on the calendar.
Yes, it is on the calendar. That is correct. It's right in between the 15th and 17th. I can't think of anything else that we have on the plate right now. We don't have any other team previews scheduled.
No, we will have more team previews, though. You guys will definitely get more content from us outside of the conference.
We're trying to schedule Northwestern. We're trying to reschedule Kentucky. We had a miscommunication there with Kyle Tucker. It's okay.
Yeah, we're trying to hit most of the big teams. At least
eventually, I think
for big years.
Eventually, I think we're probably gonna get the Orange, Syracuse, and UConn as well. Honestly, we probably don't even need a guest to talk about UConn. We talked about them so much last year. But I mean, that's our show tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be back soon with more brackets, bubbles, and bid stealers.